Okay, so we're on chapter 2. This chapter is called We the People. That means, who do you think it's going to be about? Who do you think this chapter is going to be about? Michaela?
People.
Specifically people where?
Around the world.
Think about the topic of our book. Kingston? People in the United States. Our book is called States and Regions. If you look at the front, it's called States and Regions. Don't lose your page. So we're talking all about the United States. Zari, please sit up. So We the People is going to be about the American people. People from the United States. It's going to be about our government. It's going to be about cultures. It's going to be all about people in the United States. Go ahead and turn the page to page 42. And go ahead and read Smith, loud and slow. Everybody, oh wait Smith. I need to see everybody's finger ready to follow along with the title. I need to see everybody's finger ready to follow along, starting with the title, starting with the title, starting with the title. So not where the you are there is, but the title of this lesson. Follow along. So as Smith reads, you need to move your finger. Go ahead, Smith. Zari, remember what your camera should be focusing on. Always.
The American people. You are there. You and your family have watched other 4th of July parades, but this one will be special. You have to come to Washington, D.C., the nation's capital, to celebrate Independence Day. As you look around at the thousands of spectators lining...
Sorry, where's your finger? Carla, focus. Try it, Smith. Chunk it. Zari, your finger should be following along with what Smith is reading.
Constituent?
Close. Let's look at it. It's really close. Okay. How would you say that word, Smith?
Cons.
Cons.
Shun.
So constitution. What does that sound like?
Constitution.
There you go. So everybody finger follow along.
At the thousands of people lining Constitution Avenue, you see people of different backgrounds and ways of life. Like you, they are waving American flags. Like you, they are proud to be Americans.
Good. Okay. Thank you, Smith. Before we move on to the next page, let's look at this timeline at the top of page 42. Do you see the timeline? What does a timeline show? What does a timeline show? Carla?
The present and the olden days.
Okay, so it shows what happened and when. So those dots point to when that thing happened. So it has the time. This timeline starts all the way back at the year 1500 and goes up to the present, which is today. So what happened first on this timeline? What happened first? Zadie.
The first Europeans settled in the Americas.
And when did that happen?
In the early 1500s.
Good. What happened next on this timeline? Aaron?
Millions of people began to arrive in the United States.
millions of people begin to arrive in the United States. And when did that happen? 1820. Does that mean nobody came to the United States between the early 1500s and 1820? No, that's just when a massive group started to come. And what happened most recently on this timeline? Carla.
Most Americans live in cities.
Good. So before 1920, where do you think most Americans lived? Carla, please put it away. That's too distracting right now. Before 1920, where do you think most Americans lived? If most Americans did not live in cities until 1920, where did they live before that? Zari, head up, please. Where do you think they lived before that? Carla?
I think they live in Evolution.
If people don't live in cities, where do they live? Victoria? Well, neighborhoods are in cities. I live in the city, but I also live in a neighborhood. Carla, make sure to mute yourself. If people don't live in cities, where do they live? Cullen?
In countries.
Out in the country, not in countries, because the United States is a country, but out in the country. There really weren't any cities before 1920. There were towns and villages, but there weren't really any. There were major cities, but most people did not live in those cities until the 1920s. Okay, thank you, Smith. Go ahead and read next. Aaron, loud and slow. Everybody, finger on the title of that next section. I need to see your finger moving along with what Aaron is reading. Your eyes should be on the book, nowhere else. I should see your finger moving along with Aaron. We're starting with the title of that section and following along. Remember, your finger should be underneath it, not on top of it, because then you can't see it as well. Aaron, go ahead. Loud and slow. Just read that first little section.
The American nation. The United States is a nation of great diversity,
Good.
or many differences.
Zari, make sure you're reading along.
Americans come from many different cultures or ways of life, yet many things unite us.
Good. So what's our first word? Aaron. Culture. So number 1 goes to the left of the pink line. And then on the right of the pink line, we have our first vocabulary word, which is culture. And Aaron, what is a culture?
Ways of life.
A way of life. So someone's culture is the way they live their life. Aaron, when you're finished, you can keep reading. I should see everybody's finger following along. Zari, make sure that you're reading along, not just looking at the camera screen. I'm not just looking at the screen.
What we share. As Americans, we are proud of our nation. We share our patriotism.
So cover up ISM, and what word is that? Cover up ISM, and what is that word, Aaron? Who can help her out? If you cover up ISM, what is that word? Don't look around for other people to answer. You can try yourself. So try at home, too. If you cover up ISM, what is that word? Zadie?
Patriot.
Patriot. ISM at the end of a word makes the sound ism. So if we put patriot and ism together, what word would that be, Aaron?
Patriotism.
Patriotism. So try it again.
As Americans, we are proud of our nation. We share our patriotism,
There you go.
their love of country.
So what's our second word, Aaron?
Patriot.
Patriotism. Patriotism. And what is patriotism? Aaron? Sorry, make sure you're writing these vocabulary words.
Love of country.
Love of country. So if you have patriotism, you have a love of country. Make sure, even if you are still writing when she starts reading, that as soon as you finish writing, you find that spot with your finger and start following along. I need to see everyone's fingers following along. So find where she left off with your finger once you're done writing. And then Aaron, when you're ready, go ahead and continue. Make sure that you are following along with your finger. This is the only way I can make sure that you're actually paying attention. And I hope that you actually are.
We celebrate holidays that mark important events in our history. For example, the 4th of July honors the beginning of our nation.
Good. So even though Americans come from all different places, we share some things like our patriotism, our love of country. We also share the fact that we celebrate holidays that mark important events in our history, like 4th of July, which honors the beginning of our nation, how it started, how it became its own country. Okay, thank you, Aaron. Keep reading. Carla, loud and slow. Everybody put your finger where Aaron stopped and follow along as Carla reads. Carla, make sure that you read slowly so that we can keep up with you.
Morton?
Does that make sense, Carla?
No.
So is that the word, or do you need to spend a little more time with it?
I need to spend a little more time.
Okay, let's chunk it. I'm going to write it on the board. Now you guys have got to get where you can do this on your own, where I don't have to write it on the board every time, because that takes up more time. So Carla, let's cover up all but the first syllable. What is that word? Mon.
You knit it.
So monument. Monument. What is that word, Carla?
Monument.
Okay.
All over the United States helps Americans remember the people and events that we have.
Cover up the D, and what is that word, Carla? Make sure you're using your finger to follow along.
Shape our nation. The Washington Monument and the Washington, D.C., for example, honor George Washington, the nation's first president.
Good. So Carla, go ahead and mute yourself. Good. So another thing we share is that we mostly have the same monuments. We all go to these monuments and we all remember that they are there to honor specific people and events that have happened in our history. For example, the Washington Monument, that's that really tall, pointy building in Washington, D.C., honors George Washington. Why do you think it's called the Washington Monument? Why is it called Washington, D.C.? Why do you think? Smith?
Because it honors our first president, George Washington.
Very good. Okay, go ahead and read next. Cullen, loud and slow.
Out of many, one.
Hold on, I don't see everybody's fingers. Not where we are, Kingston. Where are we? Ethan, I don't see your finger. I need to see your finger following along. Okay, go ahead and read that again, Cullen.
Out of many. 1. The United States has a motto or saying that describes the American people.
Just sound it out exactly how it looks.
E.
Chunk it if you need to. Look at each sound. E. It's spelled exactly how it sounds. So all you have to do is say what it looks like. E.
Pluribus.
Pluribus. There's no L. There's only one L after the P. Pluribus.
Human.
You switch the N and the M. It's not human, but
Man.
there's no N. The M's at the end, so it's not un-mun. It's un. Cover up UN. And what is that word?
Yum.
Not young. There's no Y. What do you say when you don't know the answer? So try that again. E.
E.
You've already said it. Say it again. Let's chunk it. Even though I'm telling you guys to chunk, I don't see you chunking. Just staring at it again is not chunking. Chunking is covering up pieces of the word and just looking at them one syllable at a time. So, plur, short I.
It. Bus.
So,
Plur. It. Pus.
not pus.
Bus.
So plur, bus. Put it all together, and it sounds like it's not an English word. So you don't know this word, but if you put the sounds together, we can't read it plur, bus. We have to put the sounds together into one word. So it's because plur, bus would be 3 different words, but this is only one. So we have to say we have to smooth it all out into one word. Helen.
Plur. It. Bus.
Plur, bus. Put it all together into one sound.
Pluribus.
Pluribus. There you go. That's what I mean by putting it all together into one sound. You can't put those pauses between each sound because then it's 3 words. So if it's one word, you put them all together with no pause. So it's pluribus.
E. Pluribus.
Unum. It's just
Unum.
unum. So that's our motto. You've probably seen it on coins. If you look at coins, you'll see E pluribus unum. Well, Colin, what does it mean?
These Latin words mean out of many. 1.
So that means out of many, one. What do you think? Let's keep reading to find out what that motto means.
People of different cultures and from many countries have come to this country. Together we have become something new, American.
So what that motto, E pluribus unum, means. Sorry, please make sure that you're reading. You're looking at the screen the whole time instead of reading. So make sure that you are reading. What that motto means, like Cullen just said, people from all different cultures and countries have come to the United States. But we are all part of one country, the United States. Did our culture all come from one single place? Does everybody in America come from one place? No. But where do we live now? In America, one place. So our culture came from many, 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 many different cultures that came together into one new American culture. So what are 2 things that Americans share? Carla, tell me one. I hope you have an answer, Carla. Your hand went up right away. And Zari, yours too. Which makes me think that maybe you didn't really think about the question before you raised your hand. But Carla, what's one thing that all Americans share? You're not raising your hand and then finding the answer. You're making sure you have the answer before you put your hand up.
We share our love of the country.
So we share patriotism. What's one more thing that we share? Kingston? Being American, okay, but what specifically? Being American, yes. So, but is everybody in America an American yet? Not necessarily. So we all share a patriotism. And one other thing. Colin?
Cultures.
Well, do we all share the same culture? Kingston?
But I meant to say about being American is I meant like being fluent to America.
Okay. But there's something I'm looking for that the book said we share these. So some of you are just not paying attention at all. Patriotism. Michaela?
Love of country.
That's what Carla said. She said patriotism. That's love of country. She actually said love of country. So one more thing. What else do we share? I even said this out loud. Victoria? What? Monuments. How do you know that?
Because it says in the what we share paragraph.
Okay, it says it in the what we share paragraph. So does that mean you were the only one who was able to answer it? No. So did I have to wait that long for Victoria to answer the question, or could have any person who was actually looking for the answer instead of just staring at the page, making me think that you're looking for the answer, could anyone have found that? Victoria, it doesn't say we share monuments. How did you make that inference? You already told me one way, because it's in the paragraphs that have the title, what we share. What's another way that you could make an inference that that was something that we share?
Last sentence on the left, like right here on this side. Left side.
Okay.
On the last sentence, it says, monuments all over the United States of Americans remember people and events that shaped our nation.
Okay. So if you guys are just going to wait for everybody else to answer, or you're only going to look for the word share, and if you don't see the word share, then there is no other answer, this is going to be a long year. Fourth graders do not get every single answer put right in front of them word for word. Third graders start that. Fourth graders do it even more. They make inferences. They have to look at what they know, look for clues, and say, okay, even though it doesn't say Americans share blank, I know that that also is something that we share because it's in this paragraph and it says that monuments all over the United States help Americans, we are all Americans, remember the people and events that have shaped our nation. So, oh, that must be something else that we share. There's a third thing that we share. What is that third thing that we share? If you're looking at the out of many one paragraph, you're probably looking in the wrong place. If you're looking after where it says monuments all over the United States help Americans remember blah, 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 you're also probably looking in the wrong place because it just continues to talk about monuments. So where might you need to look? Just because somebody has said an answer doesn't mean the next answer is after it, because sometimes people answer out of order. So what is something else that we as Americans share? We share a patriotism, we share monuments, and we share one more thing. Aaron?
The United States.
What?
The United States.
Does it say anything like that? Do we share? No. Does Zadie.
We're proud to be Americans.
That's patriotism. We've already said that. Kingston. What? Holidays. Like what? 4th of July. Were you the only one who was able to answer that question, Kingston? Where did you find the answer? In the first paragraph of what we shared. Does it say we share holidays and important events? Does it say those words, word for word, Kingston? Yes or no, please? Tell me the answer. No. So what did you have to do to figure out that was the answer? So you had to do what? Make inferences. But the clues are right there, what we share. The question says, what are 2 things that Americans share? So share is a key word. If you guys would stop tuning me out when I start telling you this, then maybe you could answer the questions too. The question says, what are 2 things that Americans share? So share is the key word. Use that right there strategy where you point to the word share. Well, we see it a few times. But we see it as the title of a section, which means everything that comes after that is what? If we see it as the title of a section in a book, what does that mean about all the information that comes after that title? Zari.
That the whole thing is that what you're talking about.
So if we see the key word in the title of a section, that means that everything that comes after that is probably going to be an answer to that question. If the title of the section has the key word from the question in it, then anything that comes after that is probably the answer to that question. So we see 3 things mentioned. We see patriotism, so that's one thing. So you should be looking at these in your book, maybe pointing at them. We see patriotism. Then we see holidays right after it. And then we see monuments. And the rest of those sentences in that section are either about what patriotism is, about what holidays we celebrate, and about a monument. So those 3 things, those are the only 3 new things. Patriotism, which means love of country. Holidays that mark important events like 4th of July. And monuments that help us remember people and events like the Washington Monument in Washington, D.C., which honors George Washington. So all of those answers were right there, but yet we had to sit here and wait for one person to answer because everybody else either did not want to make inferences or was just staring at the page, being like, okay, somebody answer so we can move on. Well, that person could have been you. If you guys are not going to think or make inferences this year, it's going to be a really long year. We are never going to get finished. Okay, turn the page. Ethan, read next. Everybody, put your finger and follow along as he reads. Ethan, you need to read loud. So girls at home, if you can't hear him, he's just going to read this very first little paragraph first. Louder.
We Americans have many different backgrounds and cultures. The reason is that we have come from places all over the world.
So now we're going to talk more about how people have come from all over. We don't just have one culture in America because people came from all over the world to this one place. So our culture is a mixture of all those other cultures. Keep reading, Ethan. He's just going to read the first paragraph under the next section.
The first Americans. No one knows for sure how or when the first people came to America.
And what they mean by that is like the Native Americans. No one really knows exactly how or exactly when those very first Americans, the Native Americans, came to America. We know when the Europeans started to come, but we don't know exactly when and how the very first Native Americans came to the country. Keep going, loud, you're doing well, keep it up.
There are many different ideas. One idea is that long ago, hunters traveled to North America from Asia
Ethan, you're doing a really good job. Go ahead and read that last paragraph too. So now Ethan is going to read the second paragraph under the first Americans. Make sure you're following along with your finger. If you were at school, you can hear him. So I should see your finger following along as he reads. Go ahead.
After early people reached North America, they kept moving to the east and into the south. Over time, the groups now called Native Americans or American Indians settled across North America and South America.
Good. So what that means, what Ethan just read, what that means is one idea for how the very first Native Americans came to the United States was that way back when, so we know here and here touches, right? So way back when, there was a lot of ice. And basically what there was an ice bridge between Russia, which is part of Asia, and Alaska, which is now part of the United States. So one idea is that people came because we know, well, you guys may not know, but human life started around here. So over time, the first humans spread from here, and they spread this way, this way, this way, this way, and then they kept spreading until they crossed this ice bridge that is no longer there into the United States, and so they started up here, and Ethan told us they spread east and south to the Americas. Now this happened over many thousands, if not more years. So that's where the first Americans may have come from. Human life started around here in the Middle East, maybe around here, can't remember, somewhere around here in the Middle East, and then spread out, and then came to America, and spread east and south. Okay, thank you, Ethan. Keep going, Victoria, loud and slow. Everybody, make sure that you are using your finger to follow along. Those of you at school, at school, you can hear the person reading, otherwise I pick somebody else. Those of you at home, just do your best. For right now, Victoria is only going to read the first paragraph under the next section. Try to listen. If you can't listen, then you read on your own, but use your finger to follow along.
Later arrivals. Native Americans were only people in the America.
You know that word. Just add an S to the word. Because they don't just mean the United States, they mean North America, Central America, South America. That's the Americas. So start that sentence again.
Native Americans were the only people in the Americas until the late 40s.
What is that? Cover up the S, and what year would that be? Do we say 1,400 for years? What do we say? 14. Good.
1400. Then explorers from Europe began to arrive, followed by settlers. Also at this time, people of Africa were forced to come to the Americas and to work without pay.
Good. So, up until the 1400s, from many thousands of years ago, all the way up to the 1400s, the only people that lived in the Americas were Native Americans. Well, then in the 1400s, we know explorers, which are people who come to a brand new land to look for something, came to the Americas, like Columbus, Christopher Columbus. Well, then after they explored it, then settlers came. Settlers are people who are coming to a land that has already been explored, but they're some of the first ones to live there. So not only did settlers come, but also people from Africa who they forced to come to work without pay came too. Who are those people? What is that called when you force somebody to work without pay? Victoria?
It's called slavery.
Slavery. So unfortunately, that's a bad part of our history, but it's a part we have to remember. Otherwise, it might happen again. If we don't remember the bad stuff, well, then the bad stuff might happen again. So a lot of settlers came, but unfortunately, they also forced people from Africa to come. So now we've got the Native American culture that was already there. We've got the European cultures coming in, and now we've got the African cultures coming in. Victoria, keep reading. Victoria is going to read everybody at home. You should be able to hear and follow along. I'm sorry, everybody at school. Everybody at home, she's reading pretty loud, so hopefully you can hear her. If not, she is just reading the second paragraph, but she's reading pretty loud, so you guys should be able to hear her.
After the United States became a country,
A little slower, you're going real fast.
You want me to start over?
Yes, a little slower. Your volume is good, but you're going way too fast, so we can't follow along.
After the United States became a country, a large number of people immigrated here. To immigrate, it is to come to country and make a new life.
So Victoria, what's our third word?
Immigrate.
Immigrate. Make sure you spell it right. Immigrate. And what does it mean to immigrate?
It means to come to a country to make a new life.
Good. To come to a country to make a new life. Hey, that was one of our words in reading last week. I wonder if we're supposed to be doing them around the same time. Maybe. Okay, Victoria, when you're finished, follow along. If she finishes before you, then when you're finished writing the vocabulary word, find where she is with your finger, and then keep following along. I should see everybody's fingers following along. Helen, sit up, feet down. If this is how we're going to act after a walk, then we may not be able to go for walks. Okay, so find where she left off. If you're still writing, then as soon as she starts, find where she is with your finger, and then keep going.
These people are immigrants.
Not. Does that say these people are immigrants? Use your finger. You have, if you're reading, you have to use your finger too.
These people are immigrants. Came.
Louder.
These people are immigrants come to the United States from all over the world. So many people came that in the 1850s Herman
Cover up the last syllable, V-I-L-L-E.
Melville
Melville, good.
Herman Melville wrote, "We are not a nation so much as a world."
So, before the 1400s, all we had was the Native Americans. But they didn't really have much interaction with each other because we didn't have cars and all that kind of stuff back then. So they each had their own culture. Well, then here come the Europeans adding in another culture. And again, did all the Europeans come from the same country? No. So there's a bunch more cultures, those European cultures. They bring over Africans who are enslaved while they still have their own culture that they bring in. And then after that, people start coming from even more cultures. All of the people from Asia, even people from Australia and South America and Central America. they all start coming into our country so that it's almost like we're not even one country anymore. There's a little bit of almost every country in the world. So that's why Herman Melville said, we are not a nation so much as a world, because he's saying we aren't just one place with one culture. We're one place with a whole world's worth of cultures. Let's look at the top of this page. We have a diagram, another timeline. What does this timeline tell us? Who can find the title? What does this timeline tell us? Kingston. Immigration to the United States. So this timeline is going to be all about immigration to the United States. What happened in the 1600s? Michaela, what happened in the 1600s?
Europeans settled and enslaved Africans arrived in large numbers.
So in the 1600s, those people from Europe, the settlers, start coming, and unfortunately they're bringing their slaves, which did add more culture, but unfortunately not in a way that was good for people. Then what happened next, Zari? Sit up, please. What happened next, Zari? Don't forget to tell me the year. Oh, you didn't unmute yourself. Zari, we can't hear you. I think your microphone is off like Carla's was earlier. So Zari, I think your microphone's off. Figure it out, please, Zari. I think it's okay. I think your microphone got turned off. I don't think it's a technical difficulty. Yes.
I think it may have just turned off.
Okay. So what happened next? Don't forget to tell me the year that it happened.
1820. About 7 million people came over the next 50 years.
So that's when we had that massive, what word am I trying to say? Gain in the number of people that lived in the United States. Did they all come from one place? No, they came from all over. Zadie, what happened next? Don't forget to tell me what year it happened.
In 1881, within 40 years, about 23 million people came from around the world, reached the United States.
So then, within those 40 years, between 1820 and 1881, about 23 million people from around the world reached the United States. So that was a huge jump in the number of people that lived in the United States. And what happened most recently, Kingston? And don't forget to tell me when it happened. Loudly, so we can all hear you. So what happened in the present?
New Americans promised loyalty to the United States.
Good. So as new Americans come in and become citizens, they promise to be loyal to the United States. So who were the very first people to live in the United States? Who were the very first people to live in the United States? Smith.
The European settlers.
Did they live here first? Was America uninhabited? That means nobody lived here before the European settlers? Carla?
Native Americans.
Native Americans. So, Smith, look at the first Americans. The first Americans is all about Native Americans. We don't start talking about European settlers until we get to later arrivals. Because remember, the Native Americans, we're not exactly sure how or when they came, but we have an idea that they came from Asia. They crossed that ice bridge that used to be there into Alaska and the northern part of North America, and then they started spreading east and south. Then, after about 1,000 years or more, the European settlers started to arrive. Okay, so let's go to the next page, and please read Zadie, loud and slow. Zadie's pretty loud and slow, and so you guys should be able to follow along with her. So everybody find her finger, you guys at home too. Put your finger on the beginning of that section. Start with the title. Carla, is your finger in where we are? That's not where, there we go. You put your notebook under your textbook so it's not in the way. And Zadie, go ahead.
Where Americans live. As waves of immigrants continued to arrive, the population of the United States grew. Population is the total number of people who live in a place.
So what's our next word, Zadie?
Population.
Population. Number 4 is population. And what is population, Zadie?
Population is the total number of people who live in a place.
The total number of people who live in a place. So in the 1800s to the early 1900s, the population of the United States grew a massive amount because all those people that came from Europe and Asia and even, all over the world added to our population, added to the total number of people who lived in the United States. Zadie, when you're finished writing, you can continue. Yes.
I think when Smith answered the question, the first people who arrived, I think it's kind of confusing because it says in the on the timeline it says they're first, but they weren't.
No, because this is immigration. These aren't the people that first lived there. These are the first people to come to America in modern history. So the Native Americans are known to have lived because they moved here in ancient times. Like, we don't even count that as them being new to the country because that was ancient times. So the first people to live in the United States were the Native Americans. The first people to immigrate to the United States were those European settlers. So does that make sense? Okay. Zadie, go ahead and keep reading. Make sure that your finger is where she stopped. If you're still writing, then when you stop writing, find where she is with your finger and follow along. Go ahead.
More than 300 million people now live in the United States. We all live in one country, but the kinds of places where we live have changed over time.
So, has America been exactly this way since 1776, when the United States became a country? Victoria? No, definitely not. It has changed a lot. A lot. So let's read and let's find out how it has changed. Zadie, you had 2 short paragraphs, so you can go ahead and read the next one. So everybody, put your finger, find your place, and follow along as she reads. Girls at home, are you able to follow along and listen to her? She's pretty loud, so, okay.
Yes.
Carla, make sure you're following along in the book. I don't know, you shouldn't be writing on your notebook. We wrote about population a long time ago. So put your notebook under your textbook. I don't want you writing definitions we haven't gotten to yet, because then you're not listening to what we're talking about right now. That's called working ahead, and you should not work ahead when you don't know all the material. Okay, Zadie.
From farms to cities. Until the late 1800s, most Americans lived in the rural areas or in the countryside.
Good. So what's our next word? Now this is kind of a funny word to say. A lot of people struggle with it, but just do your best.
Rural.
Rural. It is weird. It's a weird word because it doesn't sound like those 2 R's should be together, but it is the word rural. Let's all say it together. Repeat after me, because it is a weird word. There's a hair in my mouth. I'm sorry. Hold on. Okay, ready? Rural,
Rural.
Rural.
rural,
Rural.
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 Not rural. Rural. It's weird.
Rural.
Now all together. Rural.
Rural.
Okay, so whenever anybody comes to this word, they need to be able to say it pretty well. So what is rural, Zadie? Bless you.
Rural is areas or in the countryside.
Areas in the countryside. Rural is areas in the countryside. So when I asked that question, well, our timeline said in 1920 most Americans live in cities. Where did they live before? Where did they live before the 1920s? They didn't live in cities. They lived in Zari. Where did they live? Before the 1920s, when they lived in cities, where did they live?
In the country.
Which we call what? And this is an adjective, so don't just tell me this word, because this describes. So they lived in the countryside, which is known as what that we just learned?
Work and live in urban.
Have we gotten to that yet, Zari? Were you paying attention? We're not there yet. Look, what word did we just do? Did you write the definition?
Yes.
Well, then what is it? They lived in, before the 1920s, when most Americans lived in cities, most Americans lived in
Countryside.
Michaela.
Rural
But is it just rural? Rural what?
areas.
Rural areas. Sorry, it's right here. I was even pointing. Look at my hand. They're showing it.
I can't see you. You're just black.
Okay, I don't know why, because I can see you. And if I'm just black, you should have told me a long time ago. But I think it's okay, Zari. I think you might have turned the screen off. Zari, I don't know what's going on, but I think...
And Carla.
Huh?
I can see Smith and Carla.
Okay, well, I don't know what's going on, Zari, but you're working perfectly. So I'm not sure if it's your internet today. And it's not mine, because Carla and Smith can see me. And they can hear me and everything. So I'm not sure what's going on, but I don't think it's your internet today. Because you are working perfectly. So you need to figure out, did you accidentally turn something off? Did you accidentally change a setting somewhere? Okay, let's finish out this paragraph and then we'll go ahead and pack up and we will finish this lesson tomorrow. So before the 1920s, when most people lived in cities, they lived in rural areas. Zadie, keep going. Everybody find where she left off and follow along with your finger. Remember, put your finger underneath, because if you put it on top, it puts it in shadow, and then you're more likely to accidentally read the same line or skip lines.
Many families lived and worked on farms. By 1920, more Americans lived in urban areas or cities than on farms.
So what's our sixth word, Zadie?
Urban.
Urban. And urban means what? Let's put it in the same format as the direction for rural. Just change the word that needs to be changed. So urban is
areas or cities than on farms.
well, would I say areas or cities than on farms? Does that make sense?
No.
Let's put it in the same format. So look at the format that we have rural in. Look at your definitions. How do we have the definition for rural?
Areas in the countryside.
So how would we change that to mean urban? Areas
Areas or cities.
We're going to put in the same format. So areas in the countryside is rural, while urban areas are areas
In the city.
in the city. So that we can see they're pretty much opposite of each other. Rural means it's in the countryside. Urban means it's in the city. So before the 1920s, most people lived in rural areas. Well, then in the 1920s, most people lived in urban areas. So finish out that paragraph. Oh, while you're writing, we know that because remember we actually read this in reading this week, where we saw all these immigrants came in the big cities, and did they move far away from the cities? When we read that story in reading, they came in at Ellis Island, and did they move very far? No. So what happened to the cities? Because most people came to America and they stayed where they came in. What happened to the cities because of that? Kingston? So wait. What is the opposite of decrease? What's the opposite of decrease? That's okay. So yes, they stayed in the cities, so the population of the cities went up, which meant the cities did what? Cullen?
Increase.
Okay, you guys know. Uncrease in would not, un and d mean the same thing. So what happened to the cities? Because more people moved into them and stayed, and the population increased or got bigger, what happened to the cities? Aaron? Stop thinking about, yes, the population increased, but what happened to the cities? I already told you that answer that I was asking for Kingston, so you don't need to tell me the answer, increase. What happened to the cities because the population got bigger? Victoria? Were they these small little cities and towns like they had been before? Smith?
The cities got bigger.
The cities got bigger. The population grew, so the cities got bigger. Read the last sentence.
These cities grew as businesses created more jobs.
So the cities got bigger. If you look at all of the places where many, many immigrants came in during this time, like New York City and Los Angeles and Chicago, what do you know about those three cities? You guys even should know this. New York City, Chicago, Los Angeles, that's where a lot of immigrants came into the United States in the late 1800s and the early 1900s.
So they expanded.
What do you know about those three cities? It's not in the book. Come on, guys. You have to know current events. What do you know about Chicago, New York City, and Los Angeles? Are they small? Do not many people know about them? Smith.
They are large and a lot of people.
They
know
are
about them.
massive. So come on, guys. Make inferences. You know those cities are big. You've all heard of them. You hear about them all the time. You know those cities are big. I told you that's where a lot of immigrants arrived in the late 1800s and early 1900s. So you should have taken both of those things and realized, and you also knew your book told you that as more immigrants came, the cities got bigger. So taking the fact that you already knew that those three cities were really big, and that I told you that those were places where lots of immigrants came in the late 1800s and the early 1900s, and that the book told you that as immigrants came in, cities grew, well then you should have put all those three things together to make an inference that those are the biggest cities in the country, because all of the immigrants came to those cities and stayed. Again, if you guys are not going to think and you're going to look for the answer in black and white right in front of you, this is going to be a long year and we will never get through all of this. Okay, go ahead and put your social studies books away.